Hi everyone. This time I'm going to show you one of my favorite attacking games involving two absolutely amazing chess players, Garry Kasparov and Vladimir Kramnik. This was their game played in Novgorod in 1994. So at the moment of the game, Kasparov was over 2800, Kramnik 2725, also quite impressive. Let's keep in mind that this was almost 30 years ago, so 28, definitely impressive. E4, c5, Kasparov playing with white, knight c3, knight c6, knight g2, e2. You might consider this a bit surprising to see a move order like that. Why not just going knight f3 to reach the open Sicilian? Well, it very quickly transposed. E5, knight d to b5, and already we see the Sveshnikov variation of Sicilian, one of the most popular lines. Even nowadays it's considered to be one of the main lines of Sicilian, along with the Najdorf, also the Dragon, and some other popular setups. d6, bishop g5, a6, knight a3, b5. All of this is theory, of course. Knight d5, bishop e7, takes, c3, castles, knight c2, rook b8. All of these moves were played in the past, and in this game Kasparov chose to play h4. There was another game played between these two gentlemen in Moscow same year, where Kasparov chose first to play a3 and only after a5 to play h4. Quite interesting. It's again, devil is in the details, and for those of you who play Sveshnikov with either of the colors, I'm sure you need to be prepared for both possibilities. So h4, and generally speaking, for those of you who are who might be surprised by this move, it's not that blunder. It's everything is of course well calculated here. Bishop takes h4 is just suicide, because white goes queen h5 and immediately practically wins. So taking on h4 was never a good idea, and you might be wondering, okay, so did Kasparov set a trap on Kramnik? Did he really even hope that such a powerful chess player would ever come up with a blunder like that? Well, there is also a positional aspect here. Oftentimes in the Sveshnikov Sicilian, black tries to compensate the lack of control over d5 square, which is occupied currently by the knight, with active play. Active play connected with the bishop pair and also connected with the f5 break. In order to achieve the f5 break, you need to first somehow reroute the bishop. So bishop g5 looks like a very natural candidate. If needed, it can be followed by bishop h6, and of course it just prepares f5. Another benefit of playing h4 is that if black tries to put the bishop on g7 square by playing g6, bishop g7, which looks like the most natural way of playing this position, it can be challenged by h5. The whole concept can be challenged, and then white has certain play on kingside. After h4, there was knight e7. For those of you who are interested in the lines, bishop e6 was played in this position, g6 also. So there's a couple of options available to black at this point. Knight e7 is quite an interesting choice, because this generally invites worsening of the pawn structure. Knight takes f6, g takes f6, and this is the game continuation. You might be wondering, why would you ever do that voluntarily? Why allowing your opponent to have access to the king? It's not so clear, really. It's not so clear whether this is actually a benefit for white. Let's remember that the bishop on f6 didn't really do much, and at the same time the knight on d5 was arguably, well, the best knight you can ever create in Sicilian in any of the theoretical lines. So yes, black damaged his own pawn structure, but managed to get rid of the powerful knight on d5, and also the pawns on f file can be very quickly exchanged by means of f5, which is again a thematic idea. And on top of that, it's not really clear how white is supposed to attack. After all, black is just one move away from playing king h8, and if needed, he can even transfer the rook to g file, where the rook is going to both attack and defend. So this is really normal. This is a very bold decision, but one that any Sveshnikov player needs to be prepared to make. Kasparov chose to play queen d2, and according to analysis of some strong grandmasters, knight e3 was possible, probably even stronger, and then the question is whether f5 is strong or it should be maybe delayed a bit. In any case, after queen d2, bishop b7 was played, bishop d3, d5. So whenever as a Sicilian player you manage to play d5, you might be thinking that this is already a huge achievement. And after e takes d5, queen takes d5, it does indeed look like Kramnik equalized quite comfortably. Okay, he does have doubled pawns, but this is most likely compensated by his activity, and he shouldn't really be afraid of getting checkmated on kingside, so everything seems to be under control. Queenside castle. Queen takes a2 was definitely tempting, but didn't occur on the board. Apparently after queen takes a2, queen h6, e4, one just goes bishop e2. Why e4? Well, queen h6 of course creates checkmate threat. So e4 is pretty much needed, and then after bishop e2, well, it's really a question of priorities. So black did take the pawn on a2, however this pawn is probably not going to change the outcome of the game. It's not that relevant, and at the same time it did cost black some time. He invited the white's queen to the attack. A rook lift, rook h3, rook g3 can be tried, so it's quite a suspicious continuation, to be honest. This didn't happen, and after e4, bishop e2, well, the arising endgame is not that appealing for black because, well, at the end of the day, doubled pawns are doubled pawns, so white has a better pawn structure, more active pieces, slightly, but still, it's a factor. And it looks like black's pawn structure on queenside is not that great. These pawns can easily be attacked. So this is probably a slight advantage for white. Considering the game continuation, probably Kramnik should have gone for that. After bishop e2, he did play queen takes a2, which is very similar to one of the sidelines we discussed, especially that queen h6 was played. Queen e6, consolidating, very understandable. Knight d4, queen b6. It was possible to play queen e5, and other moves were also available, but let's just assume that queen b6 is just a logical try. Probably it may not be the strongest, but it's definitely one of those moves you would consider. And here Kasparov starts his attacking approach. First of all, whenever you're attacking, you need pieces, you need your soldiers, you need your resources to be available for the action. You need to invite all of your friends to the party, preferably, or at least, well, as many as you can. So typically, whenever you play against the opponent's king with opposite castles, you expect to see a move like g4 followed by g5, and just step by step you try to approach your opponent's position, simply hoping to open the g or h file, and then you hope to see some attacking possibilities. However, this is not always the quickest. In this case, Kasparov just played rook h3. After all, the g file is already open. Let's keep that in mind. This is a very important factor here. So in order to be prepared for the upcoming rook g3, Kramnik just played king h8. So of course, in case of rook g3, rook g8 would be played, neutralizing the pressure on the g file. In particular, of course, I'm referring to the checkmate on g7. So Kasparov didn't really play rook g3. This was just trivial for Kramnik. Instead, he played bishop g4. A very cunning move, because right now knight f5 could be played, and if that happens after the exchange, so for example, if black does something really silly, something like a5, and knight f5 is very strong because queen g7 is a threat, and at the same time the knight is hanging, and after the exchange, bishop takes f5, and the checkmate is inevitable. So after bishop g4, instead rook g8 came, covering the g file, covering all of those important squares. And this is where the main party starts. So finding tactical patterns when you attack is pretty much the essence. Some of those patterns are very easy, some of those patterns may be hidden, they may not be that clear, and some of those are just invisible to players other than Garry Kasparov. Here what he found is truly exceptional. Basically, he understood that the key to the attack, the key to the success, is the f6 pawn. Strictly speaking, as long as the black queen manages to protect the pawn on f6, as long as the black rook stays on the g file, also, you know, rook g6 might come in a moment, then white's attack is not going to be that dangerous. So he decided to break the connection between the pawn on f6 and the queen on b6 by playing the fantastic knight e6 move. And a very complex calculation proves that after f takes e6, queen takes f6, rook g7, rook d7, well, black cannot save his position. Basically, if rook e8, there is, well, a couple of possibilities. The strongest is probably just to go rook g3, anticipating some further tactical motives. Basically, black can never join with the queen and the bishop into the defense, so he cannot protect himself against these direct threats that white managed to create. So the lack of the piece, the lack of the bishop, the material deficit doesn't matter at all. As Kasparov also discussed in his game, quite a memorable one against Sergei Movsesyan, it's not really about the number of the pieces that are on the board when you're attacking, it's the number of the pieces involved in the attack and respectively in defense that has impact on the evaluation. Here we are talking about 4 pieces attacking for white. You could maybe disagree with me, but 1 or 2 pieces defending for black, so black is pretty much crushed. So accepting the sacrifice at this point was pretty much a suicide, and therefore Kramnik opted for rook g6, and we have a really interesting tactical battle, because if black is given enough time, he's just going to capture the knight. At this point he's attacking the rook, the queen with the rook, attacking the knight with the pawn. Well, you really need to be precise as white. Let's see what Kasparov came up with. First, queen f4, just simply attacking the rook on b8, so at this point everything is safe. And apparently here Kramnik made this well, decisive mistake, but when you're looking at this move, you would never say that there's anything wrong with it. Black went rook e8, and only very deep analysis shows that the only move here was bishop to d5. Why is it so strong? Well, it just helps black in consolidating. It also Well, it protects the rook, it attacks the knight, it blocks the white rook on the d-file. There is many benefits. The problem with rook e8 is that it really invited the white rook to come to d6, and after knight d5, which seemed like a fantastic way to neutralize white's pressure, because if only white decided to go rook takes b6, then there is knight takes f4, knight takes f4, rook takes g4. You might expect simplifications at this level. So we are talking about two former world champions. This endgame would probably result in a draw. And everything seems to be more than okay for black here. However, after knight d5, Kasparov found one of the most astonishing queen sacrifices you will ever see on the board. There is a knight hanging, there is a queen hanging, in some lines there is a rook on d6 hanging, and it doesn't look like white is about to create anything direct. Well, h5. Wow. This move is really, well, only a couple of players ever to live on this planet would be able to find a move like that and calculate everything till the end, and also properly evaluate the consequences of that move. Because you can, of course, consider h5, but to be bold enough to, this is a bold choice, to be brave enough to play it, well, it takes more than guts. So after h5, there is many moves, and I'm not really going to cover each of them one by one. This would take us ages. But generally speaking, after all of those, white is just better. So h5 totally changes the evaluation of the game. Kramnik did accept the sacrifice, and thanks to that, we can see what Kasparov had in mind. So h takes g6, and the main problem here is that well, all of a sudden the rook on h3 gets involved, and if black just takes on h3, g takes f7. White is down a queen, but wins. He's about to capture either the queen on b6 or the rook on e8 with checkmate, so eventually it will be a decisive advantage. So in the game, after h takes g6, Kramnik chose to pick the other rook, and after queen takes d6, rook takes h7, king g8, everything comes by force. G takes f7, king takes h7, and now we have a material balance. Fantastic, isn't it? On top of that, of course, there are threats, so it's not that it's equal, it's actually completely winning for white. Bishop f5 is in the air, queen f7 is also a huge threat, so the only move for black is just to take on e6, but right now, despite being down a piece, Kasparov wins. Bishop f5 check, king g7, queen g6 check, everything comes by force. King f8, queen f6 check, king e8, and bishop takes e6. So white is up a pawn, even the endgame would be winning, but well, surprisingly, Kramnik just blundered the queen right now. He played queen f8. Maybe he just didn't feel like playing this anymore. I'm not really sure what the reason was. In any case, white wins. However, of course, it was possible to play on. For example, Grandmaster Vladimir gives e3 as a possible line, and then f takes e3, bishop takes g2, and after bishop f7, king d7, bishop e8, king c7, queen g7, quite a complex line, king takes d8, bishop takes b5, so white captures another pawn, and bishop f3, bishop a4 is winning for white. Really impressive calculation, I have to admit, very precise, but all in all, objectively white is winning here, which is not the most important thing here. The final position is just the result of massive simplifications, but really the most impressive thing is this queen sacrifice. Everything seemed to be stopped for Kasparov, but he never gave up. He went all in, and it paid off in a very impressive fashion. I hope you enjoyed this one, and thanks for watching.